In case you're only going to stay for about 30 seconds of this review, the one thought that has been in my brain consistently since the moment I stepped out of that theater was that was amazing. Unless you've been living under a rock or are Martin Scorsese and don't give any thought to the MCU, you would know that Black Widow released globally this week. I got to see it last night and I have been dying to get all my thoughts together and share them with all of you. Ever since she became an official Avenger, Natasha Romanoff has been starved of a solo movie. However, I think this is the most fitting time for her character to finally get that solo movie. And I think the reason is, in the build-up to Endgame and Infinity War, the ending of the Infinity Saga, Natasha is a character that is super grounded. She's a spy. She doesn't necessarily have superpowers. She's just a trained assassin who has really fallen well into working as a team with more superpowered individuals. Black Widow as a film doesn't add things to escalate the MCU further into bigger, badder, more expansive in the universe territory. And so I think now is the perfect time, after we already know the fate of her character, to kind of go more ground level with the MCU. It's what we've been talking about with Falcon and Winter Soldier, and even to some degree with some of the new characters and TV shows that are being brought on the scene. We have a lot of magic, we have conversations about multiverse, but to me this is a great way to refresh the future of the MCU and say we're really focused on making a spy espionage movie and paying tribute to specific characters rather than adding to the gravitas and grandeur of what we want the MCU to be. This feels like a movie that was necessary but not within the grand plan of the Infinity Saga, and so I was really happy with the send-off it gave Natasha. And if this is the last time I ever see her character on screen, which I assume it will be, I was really pleased with it. The next thing obviously that's been talked about by most people is the performances from the supporting characters or Natasha's other family outside of the Avengers. I'm talking about the Red Guardian, Alexei, Milena, and Yelena. First of all, Yelena Belova. Like, need I say more? Florence Pugh over-delivered in that performance, and I am so excited to see the future of her character within the MCU. I love getting to see her journey to kind of figure out this moral gray area and parse like atrocities she committed in her past with the good future she wants to bring on. I like that she has that very early Natasha Romanoff energy that we never really got to see on screen because Romanoff was already a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent by the time we met her in the movies, and so I like that we're getting to experience that process from being a widow to now working for the good guys. I really love the way that this movie does not really give you anyone that is morally pure. For example, Steve Rogers is referenced a lot throughout this movie to the point where I'm like, is Chris Evans gonna show up? Like, I don't want to fall for that, but I guess he could. He is referenced so many times, and what is so funny is his absence from the film in physical presence mirrors the absence of pure moral good or just straight up moral right and wrong. As these people who are working for their government who have been psychologically tortured and trained to do things that by the Avengers standards are considered wrong, it's really interesting to have to sit with those characters. Milena, Rachel Weisz's character, the way her character specifically has to deal with the complexities of trying to be a mother but also having a sense of duty to her country and Dreykov's organization of widows is really interesting. Overall, there are great performances across the board from all of Natasha's second family, and I love all of those characters individually. I really like the fact that none of these characters feel purely good or evil, with the exception of obviously Dreykov. Transitioning to Dreykov, my major problem with this movie, if I have any really real gripes with it, is Dreykov and Taskmaster being the villains that they are and being used in the way they are. For starters, in the flashbacks to Natasha killing Dreykov and his daughter, we see and are told that the building explodes, yet we know he survives. But at the end of the movie, when Yelena blows up the plane that Dreykov is in and it explodes, I'm not really sure why we're supposed to believe that there's finality to that when very much so in the same movie we've already been told that that doesn't necessarily kill someone. But because this film is a prequel and I don't see a villain like Dreykov really having a place in the future of the MCU, I'm okay with kind of dismissing that a little bit and just saying he's gone and it's fine and it's done. However, Taskmaster. Although it was a fun twist within this movie, it wasn't necessarily surprising that Taskmaster was indeed Dreykov's daughter, at least not for me. It made sense to me with a character who so clearly disparages all other human life other than his own. It shows how true of a monster he is for him to turn his own daughter into a living weapon, not really separating his feelings towards her from how he treats the rest of the widows. But what I don't like is now that she has been taken out of the mind control and out of the Taskmaster program and freed by Natasha and her crew, I feel like we're never going to see that villain again, and I feel like that's such a waste. Even for the limited knowledge I have of Marvel beyond the MCU, I know that Taskmaster is a pretty iconic and nefarious villain and foe for the Avengers for his inclusion in video games and board games that are Marvel sanctioned. It feels like a little bit of a waste for Taskmaster to just be a tool to show how bad the actual big bad guy is. I would not be surprised if that tech later falls into the wrong hands or is used for even worse purposes later if they want to use that villain more than what they did in this film. However, like I said before with the Dreykov death thing, it works for this film and it feels very specific and particular to Natasha's character and the world that she inhabits beyond the Avengers, and so I can kind of be okay with it despite the fact that I think it's a little bit too much of a waste of such an iconic villain. Despite those major critiques, the one thing I think really shines through the organization of widows that Dreykov has and the world that Natasha comes from and now in this film seeks to defeat is the widows and these female assassins that are taken as young girls. I think there's a very strong parallel and point that the film makes comparing the widows and sex trafficking that unfortunately is very prevalent in our world today, and I think this is a really poignant argument that the film tries to point out, because not only by using this parallel does it make the unexplained areas of torture that the widows go through even more real and sobering, but it points to ways in the real world that we can be doing better and rise to hero status or do things that heroes would do by showing us that these aren't just fictional problems. I think this film is able to point out issues that are kept out of films like this because they feel too tragic to talk about in a film where there's a lot of comedy and action potentially distracting from a message. But I think it is clear enough in Black Widow that this is a connection that the filmmakers and the story is trying to make, and I really, really commend the filmmakers for the way that they were able to tie this into the story in a way that makes sense for the story, but also kind of serves as a mirror between things that are happening in the past in the MCU and things that are happening today in our world. Obviously, with that being enveloped so beautifully into the movie, I have to commend Cate Shortland's direction and the overall script and story that Black Widow follows. From the opening credits, I was so excited because it was very clearly pointing at a spy Bond type opening, with having those opening credits there as opposed to the first credits at the end of the film. The montage of shots both telling how Natasha and Yelena are split up and sent into the Widow's organization, but also showing that this is a very prevalent part of Marvel history and giving you those shots hinting at things that will happen throughout the film in a just very quick montage really kind of sums up the film and the overall aesthetic tone as well as story tone for the movie. These opening credits are a prime example of another thing that I think this film did really well, which was getting straight to the plot of the film. And I really like the fact that any necessary exposition included in this film takes place with the characters as they go through it, as opposed to stopping the film to explain it. All the dinner scenes with the family, even though they're primarily dialogue heavy and they're dealing with emotions, they don't waste that on exposition. They use it as a means of pushing the story along, and I really appreciated that. It feels so ingrained and woven into what this film is meant to be. All of the action sequences in this film are very well paced, well edited, and they all have their own individual stakes, and I like the fact that in a film with a superhero who doesn't really have that many superpowers, how they made all the action sequences feel grand enough to where you felt like you got your money's worth if you bought that 3D or IMAX seat, but not making it feel like all of a sudden Black Widow has these powers we know she doesn't have. The big bad is specific to her story, her past, And that is what the strength of this film is knowing its limits and the character's weaknesses, and really instead focusing on her strengths as an emotionally tortured and complex character. Altogether, I think that is what is so great about Black Widow, and that is where so much of the positive response is coming from, is this film does not feel like we were really late to make a Natasha Romanoff Black Widow film, so let's just shoe her into a bland superhero story. The specificity, both in character, plot, and overall tone of this film really makes the extra year wait for this movie well worth it. Last, I can't not talk about that post-credit scene, Hawkeye. I really like that the end credit sequence gives Natasha the funeral scene that people felt was lacking in Endgame. We get to see her gravestone, and I also think there's a reference to the tree that her mother is buried under, which was really beautiful, but also getting to see Yelena and where she's been. I like the idea of Val being this anti-Fury, making this alternative, revengeful, if that's a word, Avengers team.
Has it got a name?
It's called the Revenges.
Revenges?
Because I'm getting revenge.
With now John Walker and potentially Yelena, I like the way that they're going to continue to use Yelena as a morally complex character, in the sense that she's a little bit here being manipulated by Val, especially because we know what actually happened and that Hawkeye did not kill Natasha in the way that she's portraying it to have happened. But I couldn't be more excited now for Hawkeye than I already was, because you guys know this is my most anticipated MCU project that's coming up. I'm waiting for any and all information on it, and now having that after credits scene be what it was, I could not be more excited. Also, and I just have to point it out here because we're already talking about Hawkeye, Yelena obviously gets a dog. We see that, which I thought was a really nice callback. But in the movie, when she does say, like, oh, I think I'll get a dog now that I'm, like, not an assassin, I was like, pizza dog, Lucky the dog. So that's really fun for me. Overall, I loved Black Widow. I don't know where it falls in my ranking because I haven't rewatched so many of the other films in so long, but it is really up there. Like, I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars on Letterboxd because I genuinely loved it that much. Sure, it could go up or down on rewatch, but at the end of the day, I am so glad I got to see this movie and we finally have it as a true installment in the MCU, and I couldn't be happier with the way that this film ended up playing out. What did you think though? Tomorrow, Jack from Fanatic Films and I will be doing a live stream review of Black Widow, talking to you guys about your opinions, and so hitting subscribe and the notifications bell is the best way to make sure you know when it's happening. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day, and I will see you in my very next video. Bye guys.